Hi.
Here she is. Excellent. Thank you. All right. Let me get this. So this is a fireside chat. And I always feel like if you call something a fireside chat, you should have like some fire somewhere. So I mean, I did kind of wanted to have a slideshow of like a nice roaring fire, but I mean, honestly, it would probably be best for everyone else's experience if that was not the case. But let me go back here. All right. So welcome everyone to the next session, which is this fireside chat between me and Ali. We're going to talk about the journey of a young founder. Ali's got a really great story to tell, and I'm going to get straight into it. So you have a company called Cocoa Press. You're printing chocolate, which, by the way, if anyone doesn't know, chocolate is like one of the hardest mediums to work with in the 3D printing space.
Now you tell me.
So, Ali, do you want to tell us how did you come up with the idea to 3D print chocolate?
Yeah. I was actually in an intro to engineering class in high school and was kind of naive enough to think that I could do anything and was interested in 3D printing, but the teacher kind of rejected that idea because that was already commercially available. And this was 2014. So there were really no examples of commercial chocolate printing at the time. So I thought chocolate printing would be cool. I did not realize, as you were saying, how hard the material is to work with. And I've kind of been learning that lesson for the last 8 or 9 years on how hard chocolate is to do. But yeah, so it was an intro to engineering project. I got kind of obsessed with it. Ended up working on it throughout my time at University of Pennsylvania. I studied mechanical engineering, and so I actually have the old prototypes up here. So I was working on this one at the time, the wood bot. Brought it to New York Maker Faire trade shows, and people were interested in buying it. So ended up working on it full time after I graduated from college. That's the like 10-second overview. I skipped a lot of details in there.
Yeah. So, I mean, 2014 was pretty early on in 3D printing world.
Yeah.
Even on the hobbyist side of things, it wasn't like 3D printing had a huge amount of penetration in with makers. Was your exposure to 3D printing through that engineering class? Did your school have printers?
Yeah, I was really lucky to go to a high school that had some 3D printers. I'd actually switched high schools going into 11th grade to go to a school that had a little bit of an engineering program, as that was just really lucky to be able to do that. And we had our MakerBot replicator too in the corner, and that became my corner of the room.
Was anyone else interested in printing chocolate or 3D printing?
One of the teachers was interested in 3D printing, but I pretty quickly became the 3D printing person at the school. Yeah. It's funny though, because at the time I remember thinking, uh, I think at that point maybe the Stratasys acquisition of MakerBot had just happened or something in 2013 or 14, and I remember thinking, wow, I really missed the good days of consumer printing. And it's funny hearing it now because it's like, okay, those were also the good days. And so it'll be interesting to see how I look back on 2023 in 8 years and all of the advancements that are still happening.
Yeah, exactly. I remember, I think it was sometime in 2015, and I'd been working in 3D printing for a couple of years, and I was like, oh, I'm one of the old timers in this industry. Now, 2023, I'm like, I'm really an old timer.
Yeah.
And so, how did you find out about things like the New York Maker Faire?
Honestly, it was a friend that texted me in 2014 and said, "Hey, you ever heard about a thing called New York Maker Faire? I'm going, and my mom has an extra spot in the car if you want one." And that was literally the text about, and I'd never heard of New York Maker Faire before. So it was just a friend who texted me. I mean, it's kind of wild to think I'm mentoring a high school first robotics team right now, and it's kind of crazy to think about myself back in high school starting something that was supposed to be a 5-month project and is now going on
to an
Over 8
8-year
years?
session.
Yeah. It's it's been a good 8 years. I've built a lot of chocolate printers, and obviously it brought me to places like this, so it's been pretty cool.
Yeah. And so you brought your first prototype to the New York Maker
Mhm.
Fair, and then obviously that would have been a great opportunity for getting a lot of feedback on the product. But you were saying people were like, "Can I buy it?"
Yeah, so
Um,
I was actually in the Future of Food section that they had that year. Um, that was 2017, so it was actually my second prototype at that point. It was literally this one. It was 90 degrees outside that day. Nothing worked. I couldn't get an inside spot, but people were really interested in buying it, and it just kind of put that thought in the back of my mind of, hey, this thing is really fun, but also it might actually make economic sense in some way.
yeah, yeah. And so was it a matter of, I guess, after your high school class, just sort of bringing it home and keeping on tinkering with it and saying, I can make this better? And I mean, and what were the quality of the chocolate prints you were making at the time?
I think my tallest chocolate print with the first version was 7 layers. I was very proud of it. Um, the very first print I'd done on it was a Hershey kiss that everyone decided looked like the poop emoji, but I had to manually write G code for that. It was not at the level it is now. Um, but yeah, it was me going home and tinkering throughout college. It was an on and off project. I took this incredible mechatronics class, and suddenly I said, "Hey, wait! I now know how to make circuits and stuff. So, and have some experience with pneumatics. So, how can I kind of take all of that and yeah, make the printer better?" And again, it was still just a hobby. It wasn't. It really wasn't until I started working on it for my senior design capstone project and started taking engineering entrepreneurship classes that I realized that it could be successful at some point, that people really did want it, that if I just changed kind of the lens of how I went about making the product and talking about it, that it could be a real company.
Yeah, yeah. And so tell us then about your university experience, because you mentioned that you took entrepreneurship at college, and that's there's been, I think, probably fairly plenty of criticism about entrepreneurship classes within college, being that you don't have a professor that's very well connected actually to business, and it can be, it misfires in many ways.
Sure.
So how was your experience of the entrepreneurship course, and was it like inspiring to go and set up your own business?
Yeah, I think it was. I ended up taking 5 entrepreneurship classes during my senior year. Um, and specifically my last semester, I was doing it for my senior design mechanical engineering capstone project with 5 other people, and my engineering entrepreneurship lab project with one other person. So it was 2 out of my 4 classes my final semester. I was basically doing it full time. Um, and I think my entrepreneurship classes taught me about startups in a very specific way, very much the venture capital route side, which is not where I've gone down at to this point. I've been trying to avoid VC funding and have been trying to sell chocolate to keep things moving. But um, yeah, so it definitely taught one specific form of creating a company, and I think once I graduated, I was able to meet with other people who were using all of the same concepts and principles, but going a slightly different path. But I loved my entrepreneurship classes, especially my final one, where everyone in that room had their own startups, and the class was, we're going to work on our own startups for class credit. So we might spend an hour over some pizza talking about the best way to make a survey to figure out XYZ about your beachhead market, or uh, how to figure out who your target customers are. And so we would do that with real time updates from all of the startups that were in the room. It was a really unique class, and definitely I credit that class towards some of the success that I've had since then.
Yeah, I guess there's definitely with startups, and when you're going through very early stages of testing out whether an idea actually is going to work, and whether you do, whether you can have the confidence that you've got the kernel of a business idea. A lot of that methodology is very much the same, irrespective of what kind of startup
Totally.
that you're going through, right? So, in a lot of ways, you've now got, like, yeah, you're doing chocolate printing, but you've got a lot of the tools that mean that you can take those tools, methodologies, and so on, and approaches into, a lot of other startup world type businesses.
Yeah, definitely.
How have your other classmates fared since the class?
I don't know if anyone. So I think of that group, I think only 2 of us continued full time after graduating, and I think I'm the only one still going at this point. But the other semester of the class, there's another startup that is doing really well, Strela Biotech, and I enjoy just keeping up with them because we graduated at the exact same time.
Yeah, that's cool. So, and you mentioned that you did this as your capstone project. How was it? You obviously had a team of other engineers working on this project with
Yeah.
you. Was it hard to kind of give the baby away a little bit, like, sort of relinquish some control? And then also, like, I guess coming back to some, we had a really fantastic talk earlier this morning around, or I should say this afternoon, around legal liability and ownership and all of that, legal frameworks to work within. How did you sort through things like IP ownership with the university and with your other, teammates on the project?
Yeah. So I was against working on CocoaPress for our senior design capstone project at first, because just like you said, it had been my, thing for about 4 years. And it's kind of scary to give up that control and say, great, now there's going to be 6 of us plus the rules for the class, and the, it isn't what it might not end up being what I want to do. I wasn't the team leader on that team, so I was working on a subsystem, but was not managing the project. But what was interesting is that every time we came and voted on projects, it always ended up being the top project because there was someone on the team who ended up doing a PhD in thermodynamics. And, like you said, chocolate is complicated. There's so much interesting temperature stuff happening. There was someone who was fascinated by fluids. And again, chocolate solidifying and crystallizing, and the interaction with temperature at different points in the printing process is really interesting. And so it just ended up being a really good team for this project. And I got on board and was excited about it, but sent something around basically saying that I would retain all IP of the project, even going into it, because by that point, it was 2018. I was fairly sure that I was at least interested in working on CocoaPress full time, and that was one of my main concerns with doing it as our senior design project, because I didn't want to get into any IP disputes. So I got that signed by everyone. No one else was interested in working on it full time after graduating. And then the university had a pretty good process at that point for specifically undergraduates in the senior design class, that if basically that idea is we would retain our IP for our ideas. So I had something signed by the University of Pennsylvania saying, it was like an invention disclosure form saying that they didn't retain any IP for that. I had actually already at this time filed a provisional patent too. So that helped in, yeah, I had done that the previous summer. Again, I wasn't sure I was going to do it full time, but I was getting there. It was kind of, it was like a last ditch. I had shown it off 11 months before, so I had like a month left, and I was like, okay, I'm doing this. So all of that helped in the university side and with my teammates. And the project went well. This was the one that we made with senior design thing. It was sheet metal. It looked beautiful. It worked better. It had a fully cooled build chamber and all of that. was a big upgrade going from there to there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know you had a provisional patent in so early on in the piece. What was that? Was that an intimidating process to go through? I mean, you're pretty young at the time, and even just navigating like what is a patent and what are the various different steps of patent processing, and and even just engaging with a patent lawyer. And how was that?
Exactly like you said, very intimidating, very scary. The patent process has been incredibly slow, so I still don't have. I'm still working on it. It's been since 2018, and yeah, there was this fantastic series in Philadelphia. There were monthly maker meetups, and that was the first event where I completely accidentally got put on this panel with a whole bunch of startups. Again, before this was a startup. And that's where I met a patent attorney. And he was wonderful. He worked out of the local makerspace here. He had worked with startups, and he just met with me for 2 hours in his office for free and just said, here's my thoughts. And there's a lot of people, I think, who are really eager to help entrepreneurs, and I definitely saw that in Philly. Yeah, it was a pretty cool time. That being said, I find the patent process fairly frustrating. Sorry to anyone who's watching who's works in patent related stuff. Just full of delays, full of different things that they're finding that they didn't find previously, etc. Different prior art. So it'll be interesting to see what eventually may or may not get granted, but it's been a process. Yeah.
We also had a patent attorney on earlier in this session as well. So, and it really is one of those things where, as many of us come into 3D printing from an engineering discipline, not necessarily a legal discipline. And so being able to have those teams of people around you are so important, aren't they? Speaking of which, actually, I'm gonna circle back to my first original question that I really meant to answer or ask, sorry, which is why would we even 3D print chocolate? Like, what is the value in 3D printing chocolate?
Okay, I have chocolate samples to show this off.
Oh,
so
fantastic.
I think there's two main reasons. What I find interesting about a conference like this one is that a lot of the reasons for 3D printing chocolate are very similar for the reasons for 3D printing in any other setting. It's personalization and intricate parts that can't be made any other way. So I was making these, Cocoa Press logo things that just chocolate bars where I just printed the white chocolate on top of an existing bar. And that was great. It was 90-second print. And I didn't need to make a mold to do that. A mold for something like this could be $400 or $500. But then I was able to use 3D printing and not directly print the chocolate to pressure form over a 3D printed mold and make stuff that has slightly finer details than some of this, and just start to see what are the benefits of using 3D printing with chocolate. This is going slightly off your question, but
yeah.
And then kind of combining that with color, how can I then use this 3D printed molds to make colorful things with traditional chocolate making? But anyway, back to the original point. It's personalization and textures and just things that you can't make with traditional chocolate making. So yeah, personalization. I think the bars, other things. I have more things next to me, but this is a model of a computer from, I forget, the 70s, maybe, the Cray. And a computer history museum came to me and they said, we have this computer in our museum and we would love to give out chocolate versions of it during our holiday party. So it was a great place for 3D printing because something like this is a, relatively complex mold, but I was able to 3D print it and ended up making 160 of them for the customer. So it's exciting just kind of do that experimentation and see where 3D printing makes sense in the process.
Yeah. Hold the computer up again. I want to see that again. Oh, would you look at that?
And
Yeah,
then,
that is
got
a
to make
complex mold. You're right.
yeah, it'd be difficult to mold. You need, draft angles on that. Chocolate is very,
Yeah.
it breaks easily. So, yeah, easy print though. It's 1 hour in chocolate or an hour and 7 minutes.
I can imagine you probably do a pretty good business in things like corporate giveaways and
Yep.
gifts and things like that, where you've been able to, like, you can easily incorporate branding. Whereas,
Definitely.
yeah, in so much in chocolate making, you probably can't really. What are some of the communities that have come in and supported you along this journey? Because obviously there is like the 3D printing community, which is like where most of us all come from today.
Yeah.
But, I imagine that there's also like the startup entrepreneurial community in Philly where you're based, possibly like the chocolate community. Who are the people that have been important to you?
Yeah, exactly who you said. Startup community in Philly, although through COVID, some of those like maker meetups and all of that have gone down a little bit. The chocolate industry, I'm very lucky to be kind of at the intersection of two very kind industries. The 3D printing world and the chocolate world are so nice. And then within 3D printing, I think I've found a lot of um, help and support from the consumer 3D printing side, specifically the RepRap festivals. Um, and so that's who I'm actually targeting with the next printer that I'll be releasing this spring is for DIY, like hobby 3D printing hobbyists. And so I'll have a DIY kit, and then we'll move kind of back up towards the professional chocolate bakery side. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Sort of segmenting out your products for different markets, which is an interesting point. All right, You know what? We've got about sort of 7 minutes left, but I'm going to get to the Q&A because there's quite a lot of questions and a lot of them are really good. So, do you use a secret recipe for the chocolate, or is it something commercially available?
It's a little bit of both. For the new printer, I am using my own recipe, and that is letting me basically ditch the cooling system, so it now solidifies at room temperatures, and it's letting me do. I have more fun chocolates next to me. It's letting me make just incredible, incredible detail at room temperatures with a kit that's going to start at $1,500. So it's definitely a trade off, but a bulk of the cost was to allow the printer to use any type of chocolate, and so that's this new version is going to be my own chocolate. The past version, we have worked with chocolate shops who wanted to use their own chocolate and showed them how to make the chocolate cores for the machine. And so we do have some shops also using their own chocolate that they've been using for decades. So a little bit of both.
And is it a little bit like, when you've got your Prusa printer and you're like down selecting, like I've got Prusament or I've got generic PLA, for example,
Yeah,
different
I
settings
have
for
a white
different
chocolate
chocolates.
button, a dark chocolate button, and a milk chocolate button.
That's
And
cute.
then that's just controlling the temperature for the body and the temperature for the nozzle.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, can you tell us a little bit about software? How have you been able to build the software for this printer?
Yeah. The firmware for the printer is all based on open source Marlin. When I was starting, I didn't know how to do any programming. And so that was all Marlin Ramps board originally. Now I'm still using Marlin based on the Lulzbot Touch UI. And so I have a beautiful touchscreen interface for it. On the slicing side, I use Prusa Slicer for everything. I used to have to go through post-processing scripts and crazy stuff, but now it works with just built-in slicer settings. So it is so much easier to use than it used to be. It's amazing at how far it's come that I've been in making it. I have basically become my own customer when I've done bigger orders like this one, or like
Mm.
hot chocolate bombs that I sell where I put marshmallows and edible glitter inside, so that when you pour hot milk over it, it kind of explodes and looks fun. So in being my own customer, I've just been able to kind of improve on all of that stuff at the same time. So the software side is a lot easier now than it used to be.
Yeah, it's a real testament too to the open source principles
Incredible.
of the 3D printing industry. Even things like you mentioned RepRap, very early on in the piece, and then also being able to use these tools that are totally open sourced and can help you along the way. Like without that, I think there's so much innovation that we wouldn't have. All right, next question. Are there considerations for post-processing and surface finishing?
I don't do any. I probably could, but one thing that I do is I sometimes will like airbrush a chocolate print. I don't quite have the right equipment here, but one of our customers outside of LA does some gorgeous airbrushing of their chocolate prints. Again, a way that it's very cool to work with chocolate shops that understand the chocolate side, since I came at it from a 3D printing and entrepreneurship side. But yeah, I really don't do any post processing.
That's just like, magic to everyone's ears, honestly. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in metal printing, and like the amount of post-processing and the pain and the angst and the agony it causes.
When Esther said earlier today that people bring forklifts up to their metal printers to get the parts out, I could not believe that. I mean, it makes complete sense, but I will just eat a chocolate off of the build plate for the TikTok sometimes.
All right. So speaking of TikTok, I want to talk more broadly about your approach to, marketing and branding, because you've done an amazing job actually at like building a very recognizable brand. I guess, what has been like some of the inspiration for that? And is this just something that you do because you just naturally really like doing it? Or has it been something that you've had to work hard at? And is there anything like, I guess, for inspiration? Is it all just like coming from your mind, or how does that work for you?
Early on, I worked with a very talented designer on like the logo and some of that type of stuff, and color palettes and some of that. But since then, I just find it very important. Like you said, I've just seen through trade shows, especially as I've changed a lot as a person, and look very different than I used to be. People still recognize Cocoa Press in the brand, even if they don't recognize me anymore, which has been very funny. But I think one of the hardest things early on was almost the opposite, trying to not put the branding and look of things before the actual functionality. The one-person band in the beginning, I had to make sure all of it looked good and all of it worked. I don't feel like I'm answering this question very well, but I just find it really important. I was inspired by like watching Apple events when I was 12 years old, and I just appreciate the companies that do it very well. So I mimic it. I think my very first Maker Faire, there was supposed to be another chocolate printer next to me, and I jokingly said